that the right. So we've established last time that the essence of Tefillah is in the mind, right? We looked at the word itself of Tefillah. We saw the root of the word is palal, as in the Fanecha lo filalti, as Yaakov Avinu says to Yosef, saying that I never imagined, thought what it would be like to be able to see your face. We talked about the fact that the consciousness of human beings is essential to our connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that essentially is the one thing that connects us. And we looked at Adam Harishon and the idea that his Hakarav Geshamim was what ultimately allowed for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring Geshem, to bring rain upon his fields. And so we kind of unpacked that and developed it and understood that it is our consciousness, our human awareness that allows for us to be able to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in general. And that essentially is the core way or the main way in which we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I brought you a Gemara also that says how important Tefillah is. And that even Moshe Rabbeinu, with all the good things, that Yoter Ma'asim Tovim, that with all the good things that he did, and who was greater in Ma'asim Tovim than Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Hachamim say, and yet the only way that he was answered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with Tefillah. So what I wanted to do this time, as we mentioned, towards the end of the Shirur, last time, is to look at the halachot, right? To be able to look and see how the halachot of Tefillah support this entire concept, right? That all of the halachot that, when I say all the halachot, the fundamental halachot of Tefillah all support this idea tremendously. And it's usually more than we are, than we are consciously aware, or that we are kind of aware of in terms of how it is that how we deal with things. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to actually bring up one other thing before I share the page with you, right? Give me one moment and I shall do so. Yeah. Let's bring it. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the Mishnah, a Mishnah that's very well known. Everybody knows it. One of the reasons is because one of the first things that anybody who learns Mishnah learns. So this is a Mishnah in Masechet Berachot. Let me share the screen with you. Yeah. Okay, so you can see this. Yeah, the Mishnah. You see the Mishnah? En Omdim? No? Yes. So so the Mishnah opens up. This is the beginning of Perek He, the fifth Perek of the Mishnah. En Omdim Litpalel Ela Mitoch Koved Rosh. We do not stand to pray, right? Tefillah, which means we do not stand to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, unless it is mitoch koved rosh. What is koved rosh? Koved rosh literally means a heavy head. Right? What does that mean? It's a heavy head. So koved rosh is important to recognize. First of all, it's talking about our thought. And koved rosh means that our thoughts or our capacity to think is weighted, right? What does that mean that it's weighted? So if you take a paper, right, and you want to, and there's wind, right, that's blowing, it's very easy that paper is going to get blown away. Yeah. And what do we do in order to be able to make sure that it doesn't get blown away? We put something heavy on it, right, to hold it down. We call it in English a paperweight. So we put the paperweight. Why? Because paper in its nature, because it is very thin and it's very broad, it's easily moved by the wind. And the only way to be able to base it, to anchor it, is to put something heavy on top of it and holds it down. Our mind is very similar. Our mind is very easily distracted. So if you, for example, are counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and I start saying other numbers to you in the middle of what it is that you're counting, unless you're superhero, right? You're Superman, right? And you have this profoundly powerful mindset, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, it's going to confuse you from being able to count. Why should it confuse you? Why should it bother you? Just continue counting. The way that you started counting, continue counting. The reason why it bothers us is because our mind is highly, highly vulnerable to influence of other kinds of stimuli. So when I'm thinking about something, it's very easy for my thought to be moved and to be shifted. And that is usually the case for all human beings, especially if they have an untrained mind. Yes, if the mind is not trained to be able to withstand the usual distractions that come to us when it is that we're thinking, our mind is all over the place. As a matter of fact, our mind is distracted from our mind, right? Because we can start thinking about something and another thought will come into our head and we start following that thought, right? That's part of the human condition, the way that we are. So when I talk about an untrained mind, I'm also talking about a normal mind, right? This is the way that all human beings' minds work out of the box, right? When you're born into this world, that's the way that our minds work. And the less that one spends trying to, what the Hachamim are calling weigh down the mind, the more likely it is that the mind gets distracted. The normal, untrained mind gets distracted easily. And that is what we call kalut rosh. Kalut rosh means that the mind is very light. It doesn't settle. It's all over the place, right? Kalut rosh means it's there's nothing weighty, there's nothing serious, there's nothing anchored about the way that a person thinks. It's all over the place. So the Hachamim say, we may not pray, right? We may not stand to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu until we have anchored our mind, right? We have given weight to our mind. Why? So that doesn't always think all over the place. That's what the Hachamim call koved rosh. Koved rosh means it's weighted down. It's not flying all over. It's not kal. It's not light and all over. Okay? Hasidim Arishonim hayu shohim sha'ah ahad u'mitpalelim. So the Mishnah continues and says the early Hasidim, in order to weigh down their mind, right? These are the Hasidim. In order to be able to give weight to their mind, they would pause for about an hour to be able to get their mind into a place that was weighted, that was koved. So they could aim their hearts, right? Their hearts, remember we saw last time, is another way the Hachamim talk about the conscious mind, right? It's the part of the mind that relates. So that they would be able to aim their heart to the makom. The makom is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like in Latin, right? Dominus. What is dominus? It's the same as we would say in English, domain. Domain is place. So dominus is the capacity to be able to master a dominion, right? A place around. And that's the same thing in Hebrew. I don't know if it's the same. I imagine it would be very much the same in Spanish, but I don't know how it is. Is it similar? No?
Yeah, we have the word dominio.
So that's word. Dominion, right? In other words, that is territory, right? Dominion. So, of course, because it's coming from Latin, dominus, which everybody recognizes, is also the authority, right? It's the same thing in Hebrew. For example, we say in Hebrew, a place or domain is called a reshut, correct? Reshut Rabim, Reshut Yahid, it's called a reshut. And we use the same word as authority, right? So, for example, in modern Hebrew, we say rishayon. Rishayon is a license, right? It gives you the authority. Rishayon nehiga is the license to drive. You have the authority now to drive. Or in the Mishnah it says, or in the Gemara it says, that a person is not allowed, for example, to say Shema, Shema twice, or Modim, Modim twice. Why? Because it looks like he's praying to Shte Reshuyot. It looks like he's praying to two different domains or dominions, right? Domain, Reshut is authority. Makom, same thing, right? That's why we call HaKadosh Baruch Hu the Makom. So what did the Hasidim Rishonim need to do? They needed to focus their mind on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if their mind is being distracted all over the place, how are they supposed to focus it on HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Right? Lechaven literally means to aim. Like when you're shooting a gun, you aim. Yeah? That's what it's saying. Their mind is aimed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So they would take time before they actually had to engage in Tefilah, so that they knew when they were aiming their mind to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it stayed. It didn't get distracted and moved all over the place. And how weighted and anchored does it need to be in order to be able to be engaged in tefillah? Even if a king is asking how you are, Hachamim say, which king is the king of Israel, not a king of the Goyim, because the king of the Goyim doesn't understand, he'll kill you. So you have to answer. But if it's a king of Israel, you don't answer him because you're talking to the Melech Melchei Melachim, and he'll understand. Even if there's a snake that's coiled around your leg, you don't interrupt. What does it mean interrupt? You get out of there, right? You're allowed to leave. You don't want to stay with the snake there, but you don't speak. You pause, you leave, and continue tefillah in a safe place. Okay? So you hear what I'm saying, right? This whole Mishnah is talking about the fact that the nature of tefillah itself is in the capacity to be able to have the mind focused on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not distracted. Claro? We got this? Good. Now let's have a look at the Gemara, because Gemara elaborates on this, right? So Gemara says as follows. Okay. I lost the Gemara. Let me see here again. Easier this way. Good. Berachot. So now the Hachamim, they want to add. So that's the Mishnah, what we just read. But there's a Baraita, right? There's another version of it that is more elaborate, that expands on it, explains it more. So I'll read it to you, right? Tanur Banan Hachamim taught us, in Omdim Litpalel, we do not get up to pray, lo mitoch atzvut, if you're very sad, lo mitoch atzlut, if you've been lazy, you haven't been active, lo mitoch sehok, not from laughing around with people, lo mitoch siha, not from the middle of a conversation, lo mitoch kalut rosh, not from light-headed, right, being light-headed, which means that your mind is all over the place and distracted. Lo mitoch devarim betelim, not from things that are nonsense, right, meaninglessness. Ele mitoch simcha mitzvah, you get up to pray from the joy of doing the mitzvah of tefillah, of actually having the opportunity to speak to HaKadosh Baruch. Now, why these things? All of these things are the same. We worry about getting up to pray from these things because the mind is not settled. It is easily distracted or bubbling, right? So if a person is very sad, their mind is constantly on the thing that they're worried about. And they can't pause that and focus on HaKadosh Baruch. Even if they want to pray for something that they're sad about, somehow they need to be able to get their mind to a place where they put it on the side and they're able to speak to God. Lo mitoch atzlut, not about to do it from laziness. Why? Because the mind is not sharp when a person is being lazy. The mind is weak when a person is lazy. And the mind needs to be able to be strong and sharp. And so on and so forth, all of these things. Okay, so you see this is clear that this is the direction that the Hachamim are taking in the definition of tefillah. So now let's look at the halakha. How is Harambam posek? The halakha from the Talmud. So here you have Harambam. This is Hilchot Tefilah, Perek Dalet. And Harambam says as follows. Kavanat halev ketzad says in the beginning of the perek. I didn't bring it for you, but the beginning you can see it. The beginning of the perek says there are 5 things that a person must have before they pray, and if they don't have them, the tefillah is not a tefillah. One of the things that a person has to have is kavanat halev. They have to aim their heart, right? How do we know that? It says in the Mishnah. The Mishnah just says en omdim litpalel ela mitoch koved rosh, right? You only get up to pray from a weighted mind. And what did we say was that? Lechaven libo lamakom, right? In order to be able to aim one's heart out. So Harambam says, what is kavanat halev? And then he says immediately after that, kol tefillah she'ena bechavana ena tefillah. Any tefillah, meaning what does it mean in tefillah? He just said if it's without kavanah, no tefillah. Any attempt for tefillah, any motion of tefillah that is not done with kavanah. Kavanah again means aim, right? The focus on Kadosh Baruch Hu is not tefillah, and not tefillah. It cannot be called a tefillah. Well, what happens if a person prayed, meaning they said the words, they went through the motions, they attempted to pray, but they didn't have kavanah. They were thinking about other things when they were praying. They did get distracted and were not able to aim. If one ended up praying without kavanah, you have to do it again. Why? Because you didn't fulfill the obligation. The obligation of tefillah, by definition, is focused mind. This is the meaning of tefillah. It's what it is. And that's one of the reasons why we tend to wear the tefillin. Because the tefillin, as the last time, helps us to have kavanah, the tefillah. They are tefillah mechanisms as stimulus. But if a person is wearing tefillin and doesn't have kavanah, then tefillin don't help either. Okay? Now, what happens? It's possible. Remember, like I said, right? We're human beings. Most of us have untrained minds. And having an untrained mind means it's not easy for us to be able to weight our thought, right? To give weight to our thought, to be able to have proper kavanah. So what does one do if one recognizes, I just cannot have kavanah now? Matzah da'ato meshubeshet b'libo tarud. If a person found that his liv, his heart, was unsettled, it wasn't focused, and his heart was tarud, means it was preoccupied. It was occupied with other things, right? A person's mind was looking at other things. Asur lo litpalel. It doesn't say lo ra'ui litpalel. It doesn't say, look, you shouldn't pray, better not to pray. What he says is asur lo litpalel. It is prohibited to pray, right? This is Harambam. Prohibited to pray ad shetityashev da'ato, until your mind sits, until your mind settles and has more weight. So if a person is not able to focus one's mind, according to halacha, right? If a person is not able to focus one's mind, they're not allowed to pray, right? Not, oh my gosh, I'm missing Tefillah. They're not allowed to pray. And if they're not allowed to pray, they're exempt, right? They're patur. They're not allowed to do it. And that's why Harambam says the following halakha. He says that's why there's these halachot. Which halachot? Haba min haderech v'hu ayef. If a person has come home from a journey or come anywhere from a journey, right? He's been on a long journey and he's tired. O metzer, or he's worried about something. Maybe he lost his luggage. Maybe he doesn't know what he's doing tomorrow. Maybe he got into a new city and he doesn't know how it is that he's going to be able to get around tomorrow. Whatever it is, he's traveled or he's tired. He's had a very long journey. He's so tired. It's hard for him to be able to keep his mind. Asur lo litpalel. It's prohibited for him to pray. Ad shetityashev da'ato, until his mind settles and sits. What's the average amount of time the Hachamim felt that a person who's gone on such a journey will take until his mind settles? How long does it take? Amru Hachamim yishesh shirosha yamim. The Hachamim say you should wait for 3 days. Ad sheyanuach v'titkarer da'ato, until his mind cools. Right? It's not bubbling and boiling. It's cooled. It's settled. It's chill, like we say in our modern terminology today in English. It's chill. Right? You still say, how do you say it in Spanish? I know they say tranquilo, but I don't know if that's what. Yeah, that's what you need. Right? You need to relax. Now, of course, you're going to be having a lot of questions with regards to that, because this halakha that I read, for most of us, it doesn't match what we do. Right? Everybody's always, you have to get minha, or you have to go pray, or you go to minyan. And nobody asks, how is your mind today? Right? Nobody says, how is your mind? So we're going to deal with that, but we're dealing with that next week, not this week. Yeah? But let's continue. So because here now, first Harambam said ketzad, kavanat halev ketzad. He says, what does it mean kavanat halev? But he didn't explain it yet. All he said was what happens if you don't have it. That's the halakha that we just read. So what did he say? You have to have kavanah. If you didn't have kavanah, you didn't pray. You therefore have to pray again. If you find you cannot find your kavanah appropriately, you're not allowed to pray, asurit palil. And if you find that you can't pray, you're not allowed to pray, you have to wait until your mind settles until you do pray. That's what we just said in the last halakha. Okay? So now Harambam is going to say, Kesad hiya kavanah. What is this thing that we keep calling kavanah? How is somebody supposed to achieve it? And that's interestingly something that the Gemara doesn't go through in detail. Harambam is doing this. He's telling you how. So he says, look. He says, Ketzad hiya kavanah. First thing is, shifne et libo, shipanet libo, mikol hamachashavot. First thing you have to do is clear your mind of thoughts. Already that's a difficult thing for most people to do. Clear your mind of thoughts. So what you have to be able to do is bring yourself to a place in where your mind is quiet and there are no thoughts just rushing through your head back and forth, back and forth. You focus on one thing. And what is that one thing? You see yourself as though you are standing before the Shekhinah. What is the Shekhinah? It's the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with you. Shekhinah is not God. Shekhinah is the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with you. That's what Shekhinah is. That's why we call it Shekhinah. Shechen means to live with, to be a neighbor, to rest, right? It's always in relationship to Israel, Shekhinah. Shekhinah is not on its own. Okay? Now, why does Harambam say over here, Ki'ilu hu omed lifnei Shekhinah? As though he's standing in front of the Shekhinah. Why? Very simple. Because even if you have all the kavanah in the world, right? Your mind is unmovable, straight. We don't know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be present. We can't force him to be present. So we don't want to be so presumptuous, as we would say in English, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes just because I'm having kavanah. Similar, and this is very important, right? Because it's connected to this. Like the Achamim say, a Navi, a prophet, could reach the level of prophecy, have spent his or her, by the way, man and woman could be prophet, there's no different, right? Has spent their entire life to reach the level of Nebuah, to reach prophecy. And it's possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't speak to them. Just because a person is Nebuah ready doesn't mean that a person gets Nebuah. So this too, you get yourself ready for Tefilah. You speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, available for his connection. And that's why Harambam says, Ki'ilu hu omed lifnei Shekhinah. That's how your mind should be. But nothing else. So the first thing that you have to do is quiet your mind, and focus on one thing. What thing? Ki'ilu omed lifnei Shekhinah. Why? Why? This goes back to what we did last week. Why? Because the only way that we have to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through our mind. It's the only bridge between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Otherwise, there's no connection. It is the bridge that connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, if we're going to have that bridge, we have to be able to create it through our consciousness. In the same way that he needed Adam להכיר בטובתן של גשמים, to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the rain. But it requires a conscious mind and a focused mind. And that's why the Hachamim, it's very important to recognize, why do the Hachamim say it's asur litpalel? You're not allowed to. Why? Because to talk as if you're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you're not really actually connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is wrong. It's not the right thing. It's like, who are you talking to? You're not talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So how could you be speaking as though you're speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Now, if I recognize that that is the goal, yes, of my tefillah, that I have to get my mind to a place. This is halakha, right? There's not suggestions, right? This is halakha, hilchot tefillah. If I know that in order to pray, I have to get my mind into a place in which I'm not thinking about anything else, it's weighted with one thing, and that is as though I'm standing in front of the Shekhinah, I am praying. And that's what a person needs to do. Sometimes take training. Harambam says, Leficha, since that's what's required, tzarich leshev me'at kodem tefillah. You need to pause before tefillah a bit, kedei lechaven libo, in order to be able to guide your mind. And then you pray. B'nahat, calmly. B'tahanunim, you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what you need. V'lo ya'aseh tefilato kemi shehaya noseh mas'ui u'mashlicho ve'olech lo. And now he's talking about how it is that you engage. You shouldn't make tefillah as a burden that you have to get done so that you can throw it and continue with your day. And because of that, there's another halacha. Lefichach tzarich leshev me'at ahar tefillah. Therefore, you shouldn't rush out away from tefillah when you're done. You pause a bit. So what do the Achamim do in order to be able to help us with this? They put in Pesukim of Tehillim in the beginning and end of the tefillah. That's what the reason is. The Zemirot that we have, Baruch She'amar, Hallelujah, Shalosh Bebetecha, all of those things, that's in order to be able to bring a person's mind to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because that's what the Tehillim do. It speaks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it helps us guide our mind towards Him. So we're not just getting up cold from whatever it is that we were doing during the day. As the Mishnah says, and so on and so forth. And also afterwards, Asherosh Bebetecha, Uba Nisyon Goel, and then so on and so forth. Right? And we close the tefillah. And then you can go home. Hasidim Rishonim are usually sha'ahat. Hasidim Rishonim used to do it longer. They would do it for an hour rather than me'at, as he says over here. Me'at, okay? Shiv me'at. Okay, everybody clear on this? So you see, this is tefillah. These are the halachot. And this is how it's meant to be done. Why? Because really what tefillah is nibu'ah in the opposite direction. What does it mean, nibu'ah in the opposite direction? It means HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicates with us through nibu'ah. We communicate with Him through tefillah. But it requires a connection of the mind. And that's what it is that we do. And therefore, you see that Harambam posek over here. Straight out of the Gemara. Okay? Exact words. He says, he adds, not from an argument, not from anger. You don't even do it from studying a lot of Torah because your mind will be on that. Rather, you have to do it halakha pesukah. Kagon halachot pesukot. That's what you do. If you have no clear halachot, you can read the halachot and you can get up and pray because your mind's not stuck on them. This is later in the Gemara he brings this. Okay? All right, so the questions up until this point, because I'm going to look at one more thing with you before until next time. Are there any questions up until this point? I have to change my, I don't know what that is. That's from my wife. No questions? Or is he? Okay. So what I want to show you is one more thing on this. Look. You see how it says, what is tahanunim?
I think you stopped sharing screen.
Oh, I stopped sharing screen. Sorry. Thank you. Here we go. So again, see here. Yes, you can see. Harambam, he says, what is tahanunim? So I told you tahanunim, I translated tahanunim is to ask for what you need. That's what it is. Hanina, you're asking for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give you, like ata honen la'adam da'at, right? What does that mean, honen? You give, you bestow on a person. So tahanunim are requests for hanina. They're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give, right? To be able to have care in what it is that he's giving. Okay, and that's why we call the tahanunim, specifically the tahanunim of, after Tefillah, when we say, we call it tahanun. What is tahanun? Most of the time, tahanun is asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us rahamim, right? To give us mercy, to give us. But we call those tahanunim because we need that very badly, and we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu that, even though the deen is that we shouldn't get it, right? So we ask for that hanina. Hanina in Hebrew also means to pardon, right? And what pardoning is the giving of a pardon, right? So that's also asking for tahanunim. We're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to pardon us, to give us. Honenu mitecha means please give to us from you chokhmah da'at, chokhmah bina v'da'at. Okay, so that's what tahanunim is. Now look at these halachot. Very important. So important is this in the halakha. That's also part of Tefilah. Right? So part of Tefillah, if you could think of it this way, the vessel for Tefillah, right? The keli for Tefillah is the kavanah. But what's the substance of the Tefillah? So the substance of the Tefillah is that you're asking, you tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? You recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness. That's what we start with. That's also halakha. Okay. What is the hanina? There's also this, and take a look at this very fascinating halakha. So Maran Shulchan Aruch, right? He's posek this, and he writes a special halakha with it in Siman Tzadechet. What is the Siman Tzadechet? It says Yitpalel derech tahanunim. When you pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you should pray with tahanunim. Kirash hambakesh bapetach ubinahat. So notice he adds this over here. Remember how Rambam wrote this? Tahanunim binahat. Remember? Look again, just so you see it. Rambam says, "Achar kach yitpalel binahat ubtahanunim." You pray calm and tahanun with hanina. Velo ya'aseh tefillah k'mishu noseh masui mashlicho ve'olech lo, and it shouldn't be a burden. Right? We saw that. So look at the Shulchan Aruch on this. Shulchan Aruch says, "Yitpalel darach tahanunim ubnahat v'shelo terei alav k'masah umbakesh nipater mena." Very similar to Rambam, right? He's saying you pray nahat tahanunim, and it shouldn't be like a weight on you, yeah, so that you can get rid of it. He adds here kerash hambakesh bapetach. He says, how should you do it? Like a poor person. Meaning you're coming to a person's door saying, I don't have anything, please help me. And the truth of the matter is that's how we're coming to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't have, he's the only one, right, that can give us. That's what Maran is saying. Now take a look, beautiful, this is beautiful. The Mishnah Berurah, the Hafetz Hayim, how he explains this. It's not him. He's showing the Aharonim, how it is that they explain this. Beautiful. I can't. 1 second. Wait with me 1 second. 1 second. Mahila. Okay, my apologies. Ken, so what does he say over here? He says kemasa, right? He comes on this word in the Shulchan Aruch. What does it mean? You shouldn't have it as a burden. He says pirush afal pi shomra b'lshon tahanunim. Even though the language that you're using is language of requesting of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? With kavod. Im eno mehashev kemo shetzarich davar. Now this is beautiful. Look how he's saying. He goes, if you don't really need anything, He says, you're not really asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for anything. It's not, you don't need it. You're just saying it because you're supposed to say it. But you don't actually require it. Okay? And you're not asking as though you need to ask from the king to give it to you because he has the authority to give it to. You do it just because you have to. Right? Why? Because that's the words. It's not appropriate to do that. Not appropriate to stand and pray in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, can you give me these things? Please, Rabbono Shel Olam, have mercy and give us these things when you don't really feel like you need those things or they're interested in those things. It's inappropriate to do so. And then he says, Umeod tzarich lizaher bazeh. You have to be very careful with this. Then he says, Mikom lakom b'di'avad afilu im lo amara b'rishon ha'onim lo yahzor yitpalel. You don't have to pray again, he says. But it's not appropriate. And then he continues in the Biur Halacha. Take a look. He says, Ma me'od tzarich adam lizaher bazeh. He says, it's not a joke. You really need to be careful and pay attention to this. Why? There are some hachamim who require you to pray again. If you didn't actually care to ask for anything, you just said it because it's part of the Tefilá. We're not posek like them. But he says, Chen muchach me'Beit Yosef. Magen Giburim hochichu me'Harambam. Perek Daled Halacha Tet Zayin. Desabar gam ken achi. It shows that Harambam and Maran, they are saying this is the appropriate way to pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because when Harambam says Tahanunim, he's certainly not talking about the words. He's saying you have to be Mtanel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means what? So people don't realize what it means. They think say words. It's not what it means. What it means is you need to understand in your life that you require things and that the one you are meant to ask for those things is the top. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is how you are meant to come to him in Tefillah. So what do you need to do first? You need to first connect, which is the kavanah. Now, when you are standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, first you pray b'nahad. Nahad means your mind shouldn't be all over the place. You're settled. That's the kavanah part. That's the Kovid Rosh part. The Tahanunim is, well, now what? What do you have to say? It's like saying, listen, I'm going to give you an audience with the king. Yeah? I'll give you an audience with the president. So you have this amazing, this is the way that when a person meets the king, or when we met the queen or whatever, when you have to meet the king, they tell you this is the way that you're supposed to talk to the king. The first thing that you have to say, first of all, you stand straight, you don't touch the king. If he puts his hand out, you put your hand out, you bow your head, if you wish. Today they're not so makpid on it, right? Which we'll see is also domet, but not this week, next week. But appropriately, we're supposed to do, you shake the king's hand, you bow your head. And then you don't talk until he talks to you. And if he speaks to you, you refer to him first, Your Majesty. And then after that, it's Sir. So all these things, what are those things? Mashal ma davar domeh. That's kavanah. Why? That is the way that you don't get thrown out of the palace. If you're going to stand in front of the king, this is the way that you behave. This is what connects you. So you dress appropriately, you stand appropriately, you speak appropriately, you engage appropriately. Now that you have the king's attention, what do you say? Don't you want to say something that's meaningful, that is worth saying to the king over anybody else? It's like the story in the Nevi'im of Elisha. Right? Elisha, the Navi, he spoke with the king often because he was the Navi of Israel. So he had this Isha Shunamit, right? He had this woman that used to she made a room, build a room for him to stay because he used to come around and she gave him the room to stay. You know the stories of Elisha? Anyway, if you don't, you have to read the stories. It's Tanakh. You have to learn Tanakh. So he was leaving her one time and he said to her, I'm going to speak with the king. Can I say anything to the king for you? And she answered, Betoch ami anochi yoshavet. I live within my people. You don't have to single me out in front of the king. But why was Elisha saying that? Because he was saying, if you have the ear of the king, you are able to ask for things and engage with things that you cannot do with any other person. Do you hear what I'm saying here? Do you understand? So when Harambam says derech tahanunim, or when Harambam says speak tahanunim, when Maran is posek that you have to do tahanunim, what it means is now that you are standing before the king, what will you say? What you say is what only he can give you. And that's why the Hafetz Hayim is saying over here, tzarich lizaher bazeh meod. You have to be very careful with that, because even if you go through all of the motions and you finally get kavanah, and you're standing in front of the Shekhinah, and you just pap like a computer, it's not right. Tzarich adam lizaher bazeh. It's muchach. Muchach means it's clear from Harambam Shulchan Aruch. That's the appropriate thing to do. So essentially, what he's saying is that if you get to, and that's every tefillah, that means you pray Jahrit, Minha, you better have something to ask for. Barur. Very important. And that is why you see this pasuk in Yeshayahu, right? Beautiful pasuk in Yeshayahu, where Kadosh Baruch Hu says, don't come to me if all you're doing is talking and there's nothing there that you really want or need, or that your mind or your heart is part of. Vayomer Adonai ya'an ki nigash ha'am hazeh befivus v'atav kibeduni. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Yeshaya, this nation, they come to me and they respect me. We saw this last time, this pasuk, okay? Befivus v'atav kibeduni, they respect me with their mouth, v'libor rechak mimeni, but their heart not anywhere near me. And that's the same thing as this, the Mishnah Berurah is saying. Okay. Why are they afraid? Why? Because people taught them to, or people told them to. And that's what he means over here. He's just doing it. He's not doing it. He's just saying because he has an obligation. You have to pray minha. What am I doing? Pray minha. Okay. So I thought I would bring you a piece over here from the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzat on Mesilat Yesharim, which is very beautiful. He says there's three things that a person needs to have in mind. He's talking here about having reverence for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Having proper yira'ah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, I had you realize that you are genuinely speaking to the Creator, to the one who made you. And you're actually discussing things with him. Not ki'ilu, I'm discussing things with him. No, you're actually discussing things with him. When I said ki'ilu before, it's just saying, listen, I hope that this all works, right? But when you're there and you're engaged, you do it right. So you don't see him. Doesn't matter. He says, look, to be honest, it's difficult because we're very visual people. There's nothing in your senses that helps you with this. The only thing is experiential. You recognize that when your mind is in that place, you feel different. Anybody who really gets it, he's understanding, with a little bit of thought and paying attention. Again, simat lev, you place your heart in the right place. You can, it is possible to establish it well in your mind and your heart to be able to do it properly. How you genuinely are actually speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it is before him and no one else that you are asking for help. And it is from him that you are requesting whatever it is that you're requesting, not someone else. And he listens to you. Pays attention to your words. How? Only with kavanah to live. Just like if you were speaking to your friend and talking to him and he was listening and hearing what it was that you're saying. So that's just a nice piece to remind us that this is genuinely what it is that we're doing, which is why, could you imagine if you were sitting with a friend of yours that you care about and he cares about you and you're talking and you don't not even paying attention to what you're saying, you're like kind of mind is somewhere else when you're sitting there? As a matter of fact, I'm sure there have been times where either somebody has been sitting with you and their mind has been somewhere else, or you've been with them and your mind has been somewhere else. And it's maybe a little bit insulting. I mean, whether you're with me, be with me. So for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what we do is we say, look, don't do it. If you don't know for sure that you can keep your mind focused, don't do it. You don't want to insult HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay. So now, of course, with all of this that I'm sharing with you now, the question is, what do we do today? How did we get to where we are today if all of these things with the halachot that I'm showing you are the way they are? So that we're going to answer next week. Okay, got to keep a cliffhanger. But actually, yeah, it's important to be able to recognize that question. So are there any questions now before we end that I can answer? No? Clear? Okay. Good. I appreciate everybody's time and I appreciate those who will be listening on the recording. I hope that it's clear. If anybody has any questions on it, please contact me. You know, you can ask anybody that been Sefarad. Yes, Esperanza, you can give them the, but whatever it is, if you have questions, I'm very, very happy to answer between now and next week. Yeah, I hope that it was clear. Yeah, I'm going to go through. Okay, I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom and see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
See you next
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.